Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. We have some breaking news. It is confirmed for UFC 290. We are at least getting 2 title fights on the card. One being Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez for the featherweight title. We've kind of known about that for a couple weeks, and it was confirmed a couple days ago. But the breaking news is it is confirmed by ESPN. We are getting Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja. I guess you could call it 2 or 3, depending on how you look at it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But this video is going to be my reaction and my early prediction to both fights. And also, we're going to talk about, could the UFC add something even bigger to this card? And I think a lot of people are going to be a bit shocked with what I think is going to end up happening with UFC 290, but we'll talk about that later in the video. So first off, Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez for the featherweight title. This is a fight that we've kind of known. I mean, we knew this fight was going to happen from the time they both won at UFC 284. But this was a fight, a couple weeks ago, we pretty much knew that it was going to happen at UFC 290. It just made too much sense. And a couple days ago, it was officially confirmed that it will happen at UFC 290. And this is my most anticipated featherweight fight in years. Probably since Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor. That's how much I am looking forward to Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez. I mean, you look back at Alexander Volkanovski's title defenses. The Max Holloway trilogy. Okay, I was excited for that, but I already seen him beat him twice. Then you have the Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie matchup. Did not care about that fight at all. The Korean Zombie had no business being in there, and it showed in the fight. Brian Ortega, didn't really love that matchup. And also, I know a lot of people talk about that. Oh, one of the greatest fights of all time. That was a one-sided beatdown from Alexander Volkanovski. And for some reason, because Brian Ortega had like 2 close submission attempts in the middle of the fight, people perceived that fight as close when it really was not close at all. And wasn't super compelling, it was a fun fight to watch Alexander Volkanovski, don't get me wrong. But it's not something that I anticipated being super competitive going in. And then you had the Max Holloway rematch where it was a split decision. That one was razor close. And then you had the first fight where I thought Alexander Volkanovski clearly defeated Max Holloway. And for some reason, people acted like he didn't. But luckily, at UFC 276, July of last year, we finally got that chapter closed because Alexander Volkanovski went out there at UFC 276 and put a dominant beatdown on Max Holloway to forever cement he was the better guy. People are talking about the judges' scorecards and Max Holloway was robbed. That was put to bed at UFC 276. Max Holloway was put in the rearview mirror. And Volkanovski decided after that, I've been champion for a couple years now. I want to move up and challenge for a second belt. And you got to commend Alexander Volkanovski for this because not only did he go up, he was willing to be a last-minute replacement against Islam or Oliveira if either one of those guys pulled out at 280. Obviously, neither one of those guys pulled out. He got a title shot against Islam Makhachev at UFC 284 just a couple months ago in February. And even though he lost this fight, and I thought it was a pretty clear loss for Alexander Volkanovski, his stock went through the roof. So many people underestimated him going into this fight, and the fact that he made it competitive as it was, his stock went through the roof, and it had a lot of people saying, look, even if you don't believe he beat Islam Makhachev, I know some people believe that, which I think is crazy, but how is anyone at featherweight going to beat him when he's having competitive fights with the lightweight champion, and it's Islam Makhachev who's dominated plenty of lightweights? So just dominated Charles Oliveira. So Alexander Volkanovski, even though he lost the fight, he wasn't able to become a double champion. His stock went through the roof. Then you have Yair Rodriguez, who I know he's not on this crazy winning streak, and he's kind of been inactive. He only has 3 fights since the end of 2019. But you look at his last 2 fights, the Brian Ortega fight, he gets absolutely no credit for. That was last July. He submitted Brian Ortega, in my opinion. I know technically it was a TKO shoulder injury. He was looking for an armbar. Brian Ortega went to pull the arm out, and he dislocated his shoulder, injured his shoulder of some sort, and the fight was over. Yair deserved credit for that, and he was winning up until that point anyway. Then he gets an interim title fight against Josh Emmett, who's on a long winning streak. He goes out there, he faced some adversity in that first round, and he submits Josh Emmett in the second round via triangle choke, showing his ever-evolving jiu-jitsu. And the kicks that he was putting on Josh Emmett in this fight, I thought he might kill him with his kicks. Yair Rodriguez is one of the most dynamic kickers we have ever seen in the sport. And I would say right now, if not number 1, Yair Rodriguez is a top 3 kicker in the UFC. His kicks are unbelievable. And Yair's still very young. And Yair's still evolving. And every time out, Yair Rodriguez looks better. And even in the Max Holloway fight, which was his last loss in November of 2021, he won the 5th round against Max Holloway. That is insanity. And it was a competitive fight. Max Holloway clearly won. Don't get me wrong. And I know Max Holloway has losses to Volkanovski. MMA math doesn't work like that. And I just believe even in that loss, his stock went up. A lot of people thought, oh, he's going to get finished by Max. You know, he's been off for 2 years. He's coming back and fighting Max Holloway. You know, Yair was counted out completely in that fight, and he went out and looked unbelievable against Max Holloway, even though he lost the decision. And then he's kind of been inactive before that. You know, his last loss before that was all the way back in 2017, but he wasn't super active. And it was against Frankie Edgar. But that, I mean, we're talking 6 years ago. So the only loss he has, you know, in the last few years is Max Holloway, who's clearly one of the best featherweights of all time. I know he's second behind Volkanovski, but styles make fights. And for me, Volkanovski versus Rodriguez, stylistically, is one of the best fights the UFC can put on. Obviously, it makes sense because you have Volkanovski as the featherweight champion. They made an interim belt in the meantime while he went up to lightweight. Yair is now the interim featherweight champion. But this stylistic clash here is incredible. And I think people are going to count out Yair Rodriguez in this fight. And I think it's crazy to count him out. His jiu-jitsu is ever evolving. He's always looking for submissions off his back. He's always looking to hurt guys. Like he's throwing elbows off his back. He's throwing nasty up kicks, you know, off his back. And then also his dynamic striking. I mean, he can KO anybody with his kicks. He has unbelievable kicks. He has unbelievable flashy techniques. And I think Yair Rodriguez can win this fight against Alexander Volkanovski. I'm going to get to my early prediction in a second. But he also has stamina. He won the 5th round against Max Holloway, arguably. Now, Alexander Volkanovski, we know what a beast he is. Unbelievable grappling, unbelievable defensive grappling, unbelievable submission defense, unbelievable fight IQ, unbelievable striking, good solid power, and unbelievable cardio. There is nothing about Alexander Volkanovski where you can say, oh, he really, you know, this is his weakness. There's really no holes in his game. He is one of the most well-rounded mixed martial artists I have ever seen. And that's what makes this fight so compelling, because stylistically, Volkanovski is just so well-rounded. But Yair, every single time out, he looks better and better and better. And if I had to pick one stylistic matchup to beat Alexander Volkanovski, it's going to be a guy with good jiu-jitsu off his back, but also has crazy good striking and nasty power on the feet. And, you know, I always talk about, you know, the laws of percentages. If you are a dominant champion for a certain period of time, you are bound to lose eventually. And I know technically Volkanovski just lost his last fight. That's up a weight class against a monster in Islam Makhachev in a totally different stylistic matchup. But Yair, you know, he can catch Volkanovski with those kicks. He catches him with a nasty body kick, nasty head kick. He can put him away. And even off his back, because I think Volkanovski's going to have to grapple in this fight. Off his back, Yair's very dangerous. And Yair is one of the few guys in the UFC that when he goes out there, I genuinely believe he's trying to injure his opponents. He throws everything with the craziest intensity that I've ever seen. And Volkanovski has shown unbelievable durability. And I just wonder how this fight's going to play out. But ultimately, what I think is going to happen is Volkanovski is going to try to be super defensively sound on the feet in this fight and mix in the grappling. But I think Yair Rodriguez is going to be doing nothing but preparing takedown defense for the next few months. He's still young. He's still getting better every time out. And I know Volkanovski's improving as well. But Yair's kicks are just unbelievable. And that's why for my early prediction, I am going Yair Rodriguez via TKO. I think he's going to take out Alexander Volkanovski in this fight. And I just think it's going to be the kicks. I think he's going to come in with extreme movement. I think he's going to be training nothing but takedown defense. And I think he's going to try to use his kicks, his unbelievable, powerful kicks. And he's going to attempt to finish Alexander Volkanovski in this fight. And obviously, you know, I haven't sat down and dissected the fight. When we get closer to the fight, I'm going to do a full breakdown and prediction. And a lot of the times I do change my pick. But Yair Rodriguez, this is going into this fight, as in terms of the featherweight division, this is the most beatable I feel like Alexander Volkanovski has looked from a stylistic standpoint, because Max Holloway is going to have to beat him by decision. You know, Brian Ortega is going to have to try to find a submission, and you have to take him down to 5 in a submission. You know, the Korean Zombie, there's no way Korean Zombie was outstriking Volkanovski. We saw that in the fight. Yair's the first guy in a while that I feel like, okay, he can outstrike Volkanovski, but he's also dangerous off his back. You know, it's no picnic taking him down. But also he has the stamina and the durability himself to, you know, last deep into the fight and not get drowned by Alexander Volkanovski. So for my early prediction, I am picking Yair Rodriguez via TKO upset, maybe a nasty body shot or some sort. But make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I'll be doing a full breakdown and prediction as we get closer to UFC 290. Now, as far as the other title fight that is confirmed by ESPN, Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja. What an incredible fight. And technically, this is a trilogy. You know, I don't know what they're going to call it. Are they going to call it 3? Are they going to call it 2? Because they fought back in 2016 on The Ultimate Fighter, and Alexandre Pantoja submitted him in the second round via rear naked choke. But then they also fought in the UFC back in 2018, and Alexandre Pantoja won via decision. And after that fight, Brandon Moreno was cut from the organization. He went to LFA, he won a fight, he came back to the UFC, and he has only had one close loss since then, and it was against Deiveson Figueiredo. Brandon Moreno, they needed a title fight years ago. It was back in 2020. They needed a title fight for UFC 256. And at 255, Moreno fought Brandon Royval and won. Deiveson Figueiredo fought Alex Perez and won. So they said, hey guys, can you guys fight at UFC 256? And a lot of people, myself included, I thought, okay, Figgy's going to slaughter him. It was one of the best flyweight fights we've ever seen, and it ended up being a draw because of a point deduction. So they did a rematch. Brandon Moreno dominated him and submitted him in the third round via rear naked choke. Then they had another rematch. You know, they fought for the third time. They had the trilogy at UFC 270, which was January of last year. He lost via very close decision, but I thought Moreno should have gotten the nod, but it wasn't a robbery. And then in the meantime, he fought Kai Kara France for an interim belt because Figgy was sitting out for whatever reason. Beat Kai Kara France, TKO'd him with a nasty body kick. Got a rematch with Deiveson Figueiredo just at UFC 283 a couple months ago in January, and TKO'd him via doctor stoppage. It was a nasty punch that landed right on the eye socket of Figgy, swelled up his eye. He wasn't able to continue. But Brandon Moreno was clearly winning up until that point. And now he's fighting, you know, this is kind of a flyweight version of Israel Adesanya, Alex Pereira. I almost said Alexandre Pantoja. This is kind of a flyweight version of that. Because now Brandon Moreno, can he avenge those losses from 2018 and 2016? And Pantoja has looked unbelievable. In his last 3 fights, he beat Alex Perez via neck crank. That was at UFC 277, July of last year. Went out there, just rushed forward, throwing crazy haymakers. Eventually creates a scramble, like shot in on a takedown, created a scramble, jumped on the back, found the submission. The fight before that, he submitted Brandon Royval via rear naked choke. Incredible win. Brandon Royval is no easy fight at all. He's constantly scrambling. He's constantly moving. He was able to submit him. Then the fight before that, he defeated Manel Kopp via decision. Manel Kopp is a person a lot of people are considering a future title contender now. So 3 solid wins. He's looked better than ever. And he has 2 wins over Brandon Moreno in the past. So this is going to be a very interesting fight. And stylistically, it's very compelling because Brandon Moreno has looked better than ever. His jiu-jitsu has looked good. His striking has looked good. You know, stamina has looked unbelievable. His fight IQ has looked incredible. He's incredibly durable as well. And Pantoja has looked better than ever as well. He's rushing forward, throwing heavy power shots, looking to take everyone out. But he also has amazing jiu-jitsu and amazing submission skills. And he already has that 1 submission win over Brandon Moreno in the past. And when I've looked at this fight in the past and I've given like an early prediction, because this is a fight that I've always kind of, speculated about happening in the future, I've always picked Alexandre Pantoja to win this fight. But seeing the Brandon Moreno that showed up against Deiveson Figueiredo at UFC 283, my early prediction, I have to go Brandon Moreno in this fight because Brandon Moreno has just looked unbelievable. His takedown defense is very good. It's not easy to get him down at all. And I just think Brandon Moreno is the better striker, the more technical boxer. He has good power as well. And I think Pantoja is going to be plotting forward, eating a lot of shots, eating the jab from Brandon Moreno, eating those body kicks from Brandon Moreno. And I just think unless Pantoja is able to get him to the ground, I don't think he's going to be able to win this fight. So I'm going to go Brandon Moreno for my early prediction in this fight. I've switched from, when I speculated about it in January. I think Brandon Moreno gets it done. I don't think those two losses from, 5 and 6 years ago are really going to be relevant to this matchup, because Brandon Moreno is a vastly different fighter from when they fought in 2018. But nonetheless, I love this matchup. I think it will be very exciting. I think it's a very compelling fight. Stylistically, it's kind of like grappler versus striker, with Pantoja having that unbelievable jiu-jitsu. If he gets you down and he gets your back, it's basically over. But I just don't think he'll be able to do that against Brandon Moreno. So that leads me into the topic. What else is going to happen at UFC 290? Because it's been speculated for a while that we are getting Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic at UFC 290. It's being reported by ESPN now that that is not happening. But neither Volkanovski versus Rodriguez nor obviously Moreno versus Pantoja has been confirmed as a main event. So what's going to be the main event? I think ultimately the UFC will announce that Volkanovski versus Rodriguez will be the main event. And I think what's going on, it's something going on with Stipe Miocic. Jon Jones has tweeted out subtle hints at this, calling out Miocic, saying, why aren't you signing the contract? Stipe has been notoriously hard to negotiate and notoriously inactive. He's too busy answering the phones over at the fire department. And I consider Stipe Miocic retired. And what I believe honestly might happen, the UFC can be very petty. And if they wanted Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic for the heavyweight title at UFC 290, and Stipe made it where it didn't happen, they could go with the winner of Blades versus Pavlovich for the next heavyweight title fight. But either way, I don't believe it's going to happen at UFC 290. I believe Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez will be the main event. Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja will be the co-main event. And to be honest, I know a lot of people are going to complain about this. I am the first to criticize the UFC for horrible fight cards. I have absolutely zero issue with that. And I'll actually give you a bit of a hot take. For me, Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez is more compelling than Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Jon Jones is one of my favorite fighters to watch all time. I consider him the GOAT of the sport. He always rises to the occasions in the biggest fights of his career. But Stipe Miocic, he's getting older. His last fight was a brutal KO loss to Francis Ngannou. He's been sitting out. He's been inactive for the last 2 years. I think Jon Jones is going to steamroll Stipe Miocic. I don't think it's going to be competitive. So I don't care if that's on this card at all. I would rather see Jon Jones versus the winner of Curtis Blades versus Sergey Pavlovich. So that's kind of my hot take. I don't care that it's not on the card. I have no problem, and I think a lot of people are going to complain about it. I have no problem that Alexander Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez will most likely be the main event of UFC 290 International Fight Week. People are going to say, this fight ain't big enough. This is a massive fight in the featherweight division, and I believe this is the biggest featherweight title fight since Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor. That's how excited I am for this fight. That's how excited you should be for this fight, because this is a super compelling matchup. And Brandon Moreno versus Alexandre Pantoja, that's an incredible fight too. So I don't need another title fight on this card. This is an amazing card as it is. I'd rather them spread out some of those good fights. But again, I wouldn't mind them throwing on Jon Jones versus the winner of Curtis Blades versus Sergey Pavlovich. But if I had to guess, we will probably see Jon Jones defend his heavyweight title in August at UFC 291, UFC 292. Sometimes they'll do 2 pay-per-views in July. So depending on that, I believe Jon Jones will defend his belt this summer. Will it be against Curtis Blades or Sergey Pavlovich or Stipe Miocic? That remains to be seen. But I believe Jon Jones will not be on International Fight Week. And as of right now, it looks like it's not going to happen. So let me know what you guys think about all this. What do you think about Jon Jones versus Stipe Miocic not being on UFC 290? What are your early predictions for Volkanovski versus Rodriguez and Moreno versus Pantoja? And don't forget to like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.